As a small operator or a smaller business, what should they be thinking about on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis?
There's 20% of your people generating 80% of your results, right? But it kind of gets worse than that. Within those people, 80% of what they're doing isn't really shifting the needle much. 80% of what they're doing is actually already helping other people do stuff so that they can get on with that 20% of what they can do that's going to help accelerate your business.
What are the signs that you've seen that the owner becomes the bottleneck?
First of all, you can only be in 3 or 4 places at once. So the biggest thing is simply scalability, where all the expertise is trapped inside one or a relatively small number of heads, where it's not systemized, where it's not standardized, where it's not reproducible. It ain't scalable.
What should people, business leaders, be thinking about more that they're not thinking about? Welcome to the CEO and the Salesman podcast, where we dig into the strategies, the tactics, and the thought processes of what it actually takes to be successful in business today. So today we're joined by Mark Batina, CEO of Precise Business Solutions. Mark works with growing companies that have hit a problem that's more common than people like to really admit. And that problem is businesses become too successful. Now, not too successful, that's a real problem, but too successful for the systems that are behind the business, and they haven't kept up. Mark's idea and philosophy gets boiled down to a really interesting, simple idea, which is transforming expertise into assets. So today we're going to get into the real stuff, why digital transformation projects fail, what it actually takes to scale past the chaos, and how to build a business where your expertise doesn't just live in people's heads, it becomes an asset for the future of the organization. Welcome, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matthew. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Look, Mark, we've spent years inside growing businesses watching what happens when success starts to outpace those systems, like I spoke about just now. Before we get into the detail, just paint a picture of someone, all the audience listening. Can you just paint a picture of what it actually looks like and what starts to crack when a business grows beyond its own growth?
Yeah. What we will often see when we walk into an organization that has gone through that kind of burst of activity, which often takes years, of course, to get beyond that sort of initial basis where the owner, the CEO, the founder has a kind of touch point on everything, and a layer and maybe even a couple of layers of people have started to build underneath that. So the first thing is that the people who own / run the business aren't necessarily touching what's happening in the business on a daily basis anymore. That's the sign of somebody that's reached that stage, right? And we could be talking about businesses that are turning over $100 million by now, right? And there's 3 layers of people between the CEO and people who are out on the tools. But what happens through that process is that people are so busy doing business, not thinking about how they're doing that business and the tools that their people are using to try and execute their day. And so the most common thing that we see is a system that might have been in the business for 10, 15 years and was great for supporting them through those early times when really they were just about trying to figure out how much money they were making, right?
Right.
And do we have enough money in the bank to cover payroll next month, right? Really important questions, right?
These are important questions, yeah.
But, the questions I'm sure, you and I both think about in our own businesses still every day.
Sure do.
But,
absolutely.
the whole revenue is vanity thing, right? So, but what we see is that these systems that once upon a time were really appropriate for the business simply haven't kept pace with where the business has grown to. And that's going to be about the types of products that they now make, the types of equipment that they now use, the nature of the people and the skills that are now in the business, the multiplying sources of data that they have across the organization, which necessarily have become siloed. People simply aren't working as well together across the business. They might be working really nicely inside their little world, but
yes,
that's not the way any really good business works. It works by things flowing from one to the next and back again and across and up and down and left and right. And that there's friction all over the place when we walk into these sorts of organizations, right? Manual systems have significantly outstripped the central system, the accounting system, the ERP, whatever they call that kind of legacy core, which is really just one of a multitude of different places that they go to put stuff, find stuff, aggregate stuff. And all of that does is it just slows down execution. You can't be as agile. You can't make decisions quickly. You can't see where stuff's going. At best, you can tell where it was a few weeks ago, right? So these things become real impediments to that next stage of growth. Now, that might happen when a business is at $25 million, might happen when it's at $60 million, might happen when it's at $100 million.
So it's not a revenue thing, it's a complexity thing.
Absolutely.
Got it.
It 100% hit the nail on the head there.
And that shows up in businesses like healthcare, aged care, manufacturing. Obviously, with the current growth of defence contracts occurring in Australia, all of these businesses, they expand reasonably quickly because there is market demand.
Yep.
And what happens, and what I'm hearing there, is that expertise is not being, I guess, distributed through the organisation.
Absolutely.
And so you talk about this as the expertise transformation. You've described what Precise does is that expertise transformation. So it's not a technology implementation. It's not a digital transformation. Your framing there seems very, very deliberate. So where did that idea come from, where you take the expertise and transform that and create an asset out of it?
So one of the really common things is, so we've talked, rambled on about the challenge around all these disparate systems, and that's, all that's old stuff, right? Everybody kind of know that, right? Anybody who's in my business knows that that's the thing that you go in and talk about as being really bad and get everybody on side when you do, right? But the bit that we don't often talk about is that in these businesses, there's going to be a relatively small number of people who are genuinely the cogs that the business turns on, right? They're the ones who know how to do the scheduling just right. They're the ones who know how to make sure that all the numbers end up in the right places at the end of the month, so that by the time the CEO or the board gets to look at the numbers, then they all make sense. They're the ones who know which suppliers to get what from when you're stuck, right? They're the ones who know where the quality issues are going to be. If you're going to have something in this production process, that's where the issue is going to be. They're the ones who know that, you mentioned aged care, that when it comes time to make sure when we send out our bills to all the residents that we're providing service to, which could be hundreds, if not thousands of people, that here's where we're going to trip up. Here's where we need to step outside, do a bunch of stuff manually because the system can't handle it. The legislation's changed and our systems haven't been updated to take care of that. So we have to do a bunch of stuff manually. There's going to be a small number of people who know that, right? So what we see is that these linchpins, right, of the business, they are just getting more and more pressure piled upon them, because you can't scale a person, right? You can't just do a molly and go and clone one, right? So
yeah, that's right.
And kind of exacerbate that further. It's extraordinary to me that, particularly post-COVID, there just does not appear to be enough people around to do the work that needs to get done, right? So now you've got these linchpin people. They're working their butts off, right? Often we're not talking about just your average 8 or 9 hour day, right? We're talking about people that are working late a lot. They're coming in on weekends. They're keeping the wheels turning through sheer force of will, right?
Yeah.
That's neither scalable nor sustainable. Right?
Yeah. So, and of course, when those people burn out, then if they burn out or walk out, then all of that goes away. The knowledge that you've got to call Barry at logistics to actually get your delivery on time. Well, you call that company, but you've got to call Barry. You've got to have Barry's this relationship.
Right.
Yeah, Barry's our guy.
Which company, for what product, in what time frame, how much is it going to cost? And Barry's the dude you've really got to speak to, right?
Yeah, he gets stuff done over there. Like, you're the person who gets stuff here. He gets stuff done there.
Correct. That's the expertise that we talk about. Now, if you can enshrine that expertise into systems that are really easily accessible, reliable, have integrity, and cut across all of those silos that we were talking about, and break them down so that you've now got this kind of amorphous mass, dare I say it, a cloud of content, right, that resides inside your world but isn't entirely based around the knowledge that's in someone's head. Now you've started to take something that is genuine expertise into something that the rest of the business can leverage. And when we talk about things that the rest of the business can leverage, if we're talking about equipment, people get it. If we're talking about vehicles, people get it, right? If we're talking about technology and infrastructure, people get it. But they don't necessarily think of what's inside people's heads as being an asset that should be leverageable across the business. And that's the basic pretext of what, when we go into an organization, we're looking to do.
So this is the bit you talk about being the knowledge multiplier effect. It's not just, it's pulling it out of Sarah's head and being able to systemize it. So when Sarah's not available, we can actually go ahead and drive that. So what do you see as the lesson or the thought or the idea that our listeners can take away from this early part of the conversation that they should be thinking about? And then not a lot of our clients are at the size of business that you are, or the size of the businesses that you're working with in those tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. But as a small operator or a smaller business, what should they be thinking about on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis?
Yeah, I think it's really important to consider where those sort of islands of knowledge and capability in your business are, and what is it about those people that make them so super special to your business, right? And this isn't about making those people redundant, right? Quite the opposite. What we find is that you've this wonderful expertise that you talked about, knowledge multiplier, where I think of that phrase, where that phrase kind of came from in our team was if you look at, a military force, right? They have all these things that they call force multipliers, right? So something like a submarine, right? If I've got a rifle, I can aim it at somebody that I can see, right? But when I've got a submarine, I can project my force way over the horizon, right? Way, way, way further than I can see, or I can walk, or I can get to easily. And that submarine can be anywhere, anytime, right? Sure. It multiplies my ability to project force, right? We think of knowledge in an organization as something that should be multipliable as well. We should be able to encapsulate that knowledge and use it as a way of leveraging the spread of capability in our business. So if we were to capture, if I was to, to answer your question, perhaps directly, if you think about those things that specific people in your business do, and when, smaller businesses like ours, right? They're pretty easy to spot, right? They're the ones that people naturally go to when they ask a question is a pretty good indicator, right? If you can find ways to harness the things that they do, and this is the bit that I really like to talk about with business owners, small and large businesses, right? Is the stuff that makes you, right? Because if you're a sales and marketing strategy organization, then there's a bunch of stuff that you've got in the kit bag that most pretty classy sales and marketing strategy outfits are going to have. But that isn't what makes tech talk, right? It's the way the expertise is applied and the way that you've built and structured your team. At Precise, it's really, really similar. There's thousands of firms out there that have got ERP consultants that work for them, right? Or software developers that work for them. It's not about the individual skill set of a particular person. It's how that skill set is applied in a particular context, right? So the more that you can take the best of what those people do, standardize it, implement it into a structure that is reproducible, is scalable, does withstand the shock of someone, forget leaving the organization, just going on holiday for a week, right? Those are the things that if I'm talking to somebody sitting in my chair, that's the stuff. That's the conversations I like to have. Where are those sort of islands of capability, and what of those can we extract, standardize, implement in a scalable way? Again, not so that we can get rid of those people, far from it. What we find, I don't know if you've ever read the 80-20 rule book the whole
Yep.
Pareto principle, right?
Sure.
What you find is that there's 20% of your people who are generating 80% of your results, right? But it kind of gets worse than that. Within those people, 80% of what they're doing isn't really shifting the needle much. 80% of what they're doing is keeping the lights on. 80% of what they're doing is keeping the doors oiled so that they don't squeak when they open, right?
Yep.
It's the 80% of what they're doing is actually already helping other people do stuff so that they can get on with that 20% of what they can do that's going to help accelerate your business growth.
Makes the impact.
So the idea is free them up from that stuff, right? Make more of their time available. If you can double their time from 20% to 40%, actually working on helping your business grow, helping your customers get better results, helping your team be much more effective and efficient and themselves grow in their skills, or whatever it is that person brings to the organization. If you could help them go from 20% of their time to 40% of their time doing that, what does that do to your results, right?
Massive change.
And that's
I love
just the
that.
beginning, right? That's just putting a foundation in place. Then you move on to how you can actually improve stuff. Then you can move on to, you use the word right at the start. Then you can start to think about how you can truly transform your business. Does that make sense?
That's great. So absolutely. So Matt, what I want to do is I want to sort of change direction here and just sort of change the tone a little bit, because you've said that most digital projects fail. Now, It's not because people go out there to make them fail. So when you think about a digital project and why they fail, what are they getting fundamentally wrong? Is it, at what point are they starting to drift? So what are they doing wrong, and what advice can you give? Because you've gone through thousands of digital transformation projects for businesses of gigantic size. What advice can you provide to people? I guess, let's start with what are they getting wrong, and then what can they do about it?
You know what? In some ways, there's kind of I hate to say this, there's not a lot of magic to it, right? Because it comes at its base is actually some pretty simple principles, right? That in any well, I was going to say in any corporate project, any business project, there are a few things that you just got to put in place. Otherwise, you are just pushing rocks uphill, right?
Yeah.
And Matt knows that I'm very guarding my language there compared to what I've done with that.
Don't worry, we swear on this show if you like.
Excellent. Is some real fundamental basics. Executive sponsorship, right? If you're going to embark on a journey that you give such a highfalutin name as digital transformation to, then your executive team, your owners, whatever it is that's in your structure, they better be all in, right? Because this ain't going to be over next Tuesday, right?
Yep.
This is going to be a years-long process that this is something I say actually never ends, right? Because the world is constantly changing around us. The OODA loop keeps happening, right? If your listeners aren't familiar with that, go look it up. OODA loop, OODA loop. Really, really important principle to get behind. That OODA loop keeps getting smaller and smaller. Your decisions have to happen faster and faster because the inputs are coming at you faster and faster. The world is changing around you. The stuff you can't control is changing so fast. It never stops, right? That's not a reason not to start, by the way. But my point is, you've got to be the people who ultimately control what resources get applied, what priority the project gets attributed, what the objectives of the project are, and then measure against the delivery to those objectives. They better be all in. That's the first thing. Executive sponsorship. The second thing is clarity of expectation. Now,
come on, isn't there supposed to be just some sort of future nirvana where things just happen and things just roll off the production line?
Some of our $1 trillion software company friends out there will come up with ways for this shit to just happen all by itself.
Elon will save us with Optimus robots.
Well, indeed. I kind of have this picture from the old Flying High airport movie of,
Yep.
Otto, the autopilot sitting there.
Yeah.
It's far playing, right?
That's right.
Stick a pin in him, plug him in. That's the first thing. The second thing is clarity of purpose. What is it that we're actually trying to achieve, and how do we measure our progress against that, right? So again, I hate to be really, really simple and old-fashioned, but what are our SMART objectives that we're targeting with this project? The third thing is, within that, and sort of aligned to that clarity of expectation, is making sure that what you're doing is the A in that SMART, right? It's achievable. We can actually do this in chunks that make sense. So we talk about the journey to maturity in this space, right, as being a kind of 3-stage evolution for an organization. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? Yet another catch cry, right? But it's true when it comes to this stuff. Nothing truer. You've got to start with stuff that you can get done that puts a foundation in place, right? Then once you've got your good stuff working well, you can then figure out how you can make it even better, and you can start to improve. Where are those natural business improvements going to fall out now that we've put foundations in place of good processes, good systems, good collaboration, all that, good reporting, etc. Once we've got that in place, we've addressed 80% of our problems, right, just by moving into the right new generation set of tools. How do we move on to genuinely improving the business with those tools as the enabler? And then once you've got that happening on a business as usual basis, right? Once the goal line is shifted and you've got that just occurring, the next thing you can truly look for is look for transformation. So if that kind of next thing is do things in chunks that are manageable, and where you can really articulate to your team what it is that they're doing, why they're doing it now, why you've selected them to be part of it, and what's in it for them, right? 5 W's, right? Again, another pretty simple, basic, old-fashioned principle. But those are kind of the core things that most organizations get some or none of right and crash and burn. They try and go from here to there. I'll give you a great example. We worked with a distribution company a few years ago, and all they wanted to be, they're a manufacturer that then distributed the stuff that they make, right? And all they wanted to do was get online. We've got to have a website. We've got to be able to sell stuff to people. Fantastic. Great. But so they went out and they hired somebody to write them a website, right? I'm amazed at the number of people that still do this, by the way. But anyway, we'll go out and write them a website. It was fantastic, and it was all singing, all dancing. It looked cool. It was actually easy to use, etc., etc. But first of all, they hadn't connected it well to their kind of core ERP system, right? So there was a disparity in the information that the website was saying and what the ERP system was saying. So somebody would go online and order something, which the online gateway might say you can have that in a week, but in actual fact it was going to take 4 weeks. So straight away we've set ourselves up to fail, because we're disappointing the very first customer that we've talked to, because we've built this fantastic transformative website which is going to change the way that we interact with our customers, and then we've screwed up the actual delivery of the product that they've tried to order, right?
Yeah.
So if you kind of wind that back, unpick it even further, it goes right back to, okay, well, is 4 weeks too long? If we're going to say a week, if that's our objective, how do we get it done in a week? What do we have to do to our processes, to our systems, to our supply chain, et cetera, to get that right? If we put that foundation in place, then we can make sure that our buyer, having spent these hundreds of thousands of dollars to attract them to our website, actually has a good experience. So that's just one little anecdote of how you can set out with the best intentions in the world, but if you haven't put foundations in place that support that outcome, you're screwed.
Got it. So what I've observed in sales, and also probably seen in the operational side, is the founder becomes the biggest bottleneck in the business. Yeah. So at what point do you see that happening? And what are the signs? I guess what I'm really looking for is not external signs like size or complexity, but what are the signs that you've seen that the owner becomes the bottleneck?
Well, first of all, you can only be in 3 or 4 places at once, right?
Yeah.
The biggest thing is simply scalability, right? Where all the expertise is trapped inside one or a relatively small number of heads, where it's not systemized, where it's not standardized, where it's not reproducible, it ain't scalable. So the first thing that we see, and again, this can be in a business that's $10 million in size, right? There's a manufacturer that we work with who's a owner founder, great business, make fantastic capital equipment products. The engineering is superb, and they've got a wonderful reputation for what they do. He wants to take his business to the next level because him and his partner are looking and saying, we worked our butts off for the last decade to get our business to where we are. We can't work that hard for the next 10 years. First of all, we got little kids. We want to spend more time with them, right? Well, I can't be going to watch Jenny's netball game or her cricket game or Billy's football game if I'm in the shop on Saturday making sure that the production of that piece of equipment that we promised our customer is going to be rolling out our door on Monday is happening, right? If I'm the guy who has to make that happen, then I'm not at Jenny's cricket match. I'm not at Billy's footy game, right? I'm there. So that's the first thing, is that I see founders who simply have too much to do in their day, such that their day isn't just a day, and all roads lead back to them for the important decisions, for the important bit of data that helps the next step in a given process happen. So that's one of the first things that I see.
Yeah, I heard on an interview, I can't remember the CEO talking about it, but they become a filter for the worst problems because nobody wants to make those hard decisions, so they become a filter for the worst problems. So your whole day you're just dealing with the worst stuff.
Yeah.
Like nobody's bringing the leader the easy decision, the quick win. Because those problems will be solved by the people who are in those roles. And so I guess the idea there is, as you systemize and turn those expertise into assets, and as you continue to build the business, you want to find a way of creating operationally a way to deal with those harder and harder the problems. Therefore, when the problem does get to you, it really is an issue that the business hasn't seen before.
I'll take it one step further and say, the occurrence of those problems becomes less and less and less because you've systemized the knowledge into process, and you've got systems that are built from the ground up to support your type of business in the first place. So you're not having to try and make the system do all the stuff that is 80% of what your business do. Back to Paretos, right? I said it before that 80% of, if I go into a given aged care organisation in Australia, great example, everybody works to the same legislation. You can't make up your own legislation. You can't decide the algorithms and the data that has to be considered when you're going to figure out the price of somebody's daily care, right? There is 80% of that is defined for you, right? You can't do it any differently. Now, there's bits that make you, the extra services that you do, the quality of the residential care facility that somebody might be in, the type of linen that they get to eat their lunch off, etc. Those are the things that make you. But 80% of what you do, everybody else in your industry has to do as well. How well you do it, right, determines how much of the time your business can spend on that 20% that makes you.
So a lot of the people, sorry, go on.
But just to read.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yep.
It's not just about making it so the problems that filter up to you are, the easier to deal with. It's about making sure that 80% of the problems that you were having to deal with, you don't have to deal with, because now the processes have been systemized into a platform that's built for your type of business in the first place. So the stuff that's coming to you is either the stuff that's really, really good or really, really bad, that is beyond that 80% BAU.
Yeah, got it.
Does that make sense?
So absolutely. And so a lot of people listening, the dream is to exit their business and sell their company at some stage. Can you talk to us about an example where you've seen a business that hasn't been systemized or hasn't taken the time and energy to do that, and valuation and how it goes through a sales process versus one that has? Because I know you work with businesses that have done that digital transformation for many years, but have you seen that? How much is that difference really?
So if you look at, let's take a manufacturing business, right? A really good manufacturing business that turns out good stuff. And look, we work typically with, you've said it before, people in aerospace and defense, who work with people who are in things like steel fabrication and pipe manufacture and stuff like that, right? People who work with stuff, with things, right? They turn out things for people, right? I think that the way that they go about that is largely pretty similar across a lot of businesses, right? So there's a degree of measurability about those businesses. I was just listening to I was in a session with somebody only just this week talking about the bell curve distribution of valuations. Right. So if you're a manufacturer, there's going to be a bell curve that represents transactions that have happened in, equity transactions that have happened in your space over the last 2 years. And you're going to be able to identify where on that normal distribution of valuation multipliers your business sits, right? There's going to be the middle of the curve, right? Let's say for a manufacturer, that might be 4.5 times EBITDA, right? A good, solid manufacturing business that PE wants to come in and buy is going to look at that and say, right, our starting point is 4.5. How do I get that less? Right. How do I not pay 4.5? How do I pay 3.5? Right. As a business owner, you're looking at your business and saying, well, there's no way it's only worth 4.5 times my EBITDA.
I built this from my grandfather helped me build this business. It's worth.
You betcha. It's at least a 7 or 8 times multiplier. And if I think about it, it needs to be a 7 or 8 times multiplier because that's how I want to live once I exit and the stuff that I want to get on and do with my life. So now you've got this big disparity, right? The tension in any equity transaction. Buyer wants to pay as little as possible. Seller wants to sell for much more than the buyer thinks it's worth, right? So there's all these things that pull that line to the left or to the right of that distribution curve. And it's absolutely 100% accurate to say that systems maturity is definitely one of those things that as a seller pushes you to the right of that distribution curve. If private capital can walk in, inject money into your business, either outright buy or as a investment, and they can see that the business is really well run, first of all, the data that's sitting in your data room is probably going to be of reasonable quality, right? So there's another tick. That's another prevention of downside in that valuation, right? Because they can believe the data that you're giving them.
Yes.
Secondly, in terms of, that's protects your downside, but pushing it off to that right side of the valuation curve is about showing that your business is really solid. That's a million little things. It's all our employees are on the same, on contracts, right? All our customers are signed up to supply contracts, whatever it is. But our big one is, how well would the business run if that person isn't there? If Mary, the owner founder, or the daughter of the owner founder isn't there because she sold out, how well does the company run? That's entirely dependent, not entirely, but it's 80% dependent on the quality of the systems and that knowledge infrastructure that's been built into the organization. So you can go as a manufacturer from a 4.5 to a 6 because you can document, you can show in your IM at the start, and then when you get really deep into DD, you can show how well your business executes, how the quality is managed, how your engineering controls are in place, so you always build the right thing for the customer. And if you're in aerospace and defense, for example, that is absolutely fundamental to scalability. There's all this money floating around in defense right now, right? Governments are falling over themselves to build sovereign defense capability. So they're trying to encourage manufacturers to get into defense manufacturing. But if you can't, it doesn't matter how good your engineering capabilities are, if your systems can't help you on demand prove that you built what you were supposed to build to the drawing that they gave you, that's part of a bigger drawing, well, you're never getting another defense contract, right? So if that's your business and you want to sell out because you can see somebody who maybe wants to take you out as a strategic buyer or just wants to pump money into a business like yours to reap the rewards of growth, then having systems that support those absolutely fundamental business processes to be in your industry as easy as possible to execute on a reliable and regular basis, your valuation goes up. That simple.
Got it. So, Mark, I want to change directions here and talk about lessons from the trenches. Now, you've been inside of hundreds of organizations over the last 30 years, and you know that they're starting to break. What are the most expensive mistakes that founders are making, and the one that keeps showing up regardless of the size and industry?
That's a great question. Again, there's a reasonable degree of similarity when you kind of look across the data set, right? There's a couple of things. One is that they don't see the importance for too long of investing in systems. And I don't mean bits and pieces of systems here. I'm talking about core platform. In our world, we call that the ERP, right? That core ERP that is primarily built for businesses like yours, right? So we're not just talking about some general ERP, which is, that's great. They all have their place, right? But if you genuinely want to make a big difference to your business, you don't want to spend most of the time teaching your system or the people who are trying to implement it how a business like yours runs, right? So that's the first thing.
Because people's businesses aren't that unique. We've already established that, right? Whether you're making widgets or you're making swimming pools, like there's other businesses out there making widgets and swimming pools, and there's an ERP for that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that what you want to do is you want to be able to you don't want to be spending your 80% of your time just making 80% of the system work, right? You want to be spending as little of your time doing those really basic fundamentals that any system that is really designed for a capital equipment manufacturer should just do, right? What you want to do is then really learn how you can harness the tools and capabilities of that system that's built for an organization like yours to implement and systemize that expertise that, as I said before, makes you, right? So that's one of the first mistakes that I see is we've finally, ultimately, we just can't put it off anymore. We have to replace our system, right? Because people are getting burnt out, people are leaving, they're pissed off. We're failing to meet our delivery in full on time targets, where our customers are starting to leave us because we're unreliable or our quality isn't great. All the things that start to creak, right, aren't just creaking anymore. They're starting to snap, right? And that might be one of those key people, one of those linchpins just says, this is just too hard. I'm working 16 hours a day. I'm not seeing my family, blah, blah, blah. These guys over here have offered me 25% more. So I'm off. Time for me to do something different, right? So that's an example of something breaking. Doesn't have to be that we screwed up an order. That could be the break, right? But it's often though lots of those little things aggregate to start to make a pretty big problem for the business. So that's it's that you put it off for too long. You keep band-aiding and band-aiding and band-aiding and band-aiding. So ultimately there's more band-aid than there is actual system. You can't see the wound anymore because there's so much bandage all over the entire arm that you don't even remember where the where the cut was, right?
Got it.
So that's kind of one of the big things is they put off the realization or the acquiescence that it's time to just do something about this. This now has to come before buying that next piece of really expensive plant or before we go out and renew the truck fleet, right? This is now more important than that. That's one of the big things.
Got it. So, lesson in the same vein as lesson from the trenches, have you actually seen a situation where a technology project actually made the business not just failed to deliver, but actually sent the company backwards? And if you did, what happened and what actually caused that?
Thankfully, not been in one, but certainly that's our industry abounds with those.
You've rescued a few, I'd say.
Failures. Oh, look, we've certainly come into a couple of organisations where they came to that realisation I was talking about, or that recognition that it was time to do something 3 years before. They went out, they did what they thought was all the right due diligence. They got in a system, got in an organisation to help them. And then it turns out that there's a whole bunch of stuff that they didn't do well, from fitness for purpose of the system that they bought to right at that very top that I was talking about, executive sponsorship, connecting the business to the project, making sure that the right resources were given the right time and had the right capabilities to actually implement this expertise into the systems, etc. And again, oftentimes there is a pretty heavy, it just wasn't the right tool for the job thing, right? And so 3 or 4 years later, they are, depending on the size of the business, tens of thousands of dollars of hard cash plus God knows how many hours of people, right, down the drain to hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars down the drain. And it's not just that money and that people stress that they've gone through, right? That's capital they haven't been able to employ in the growth of the business, whether it's human capital.
Opportunity costs.
Absolutely. So not only has the business not been able to reap the benefits that it set out to achieve when it started that project, they've actually had their business severely interrupted, even if they're still somehow able to get product out the door and still able to meet the same product quality that they were doing before this abomination of the system project happened. There's a whole bunch of stuff that they haven't been able to do. And, you know the old adage, right? If you're not growing at 10%, you're standing still, right? So they haven't just been standing still. They've actually been sliding down the hill to a lesser or greater extent, right?
So they made the wrong choice in relation to system, and then they stuck with it. They stuck with it too long, even though they made that wrong choice.
Yeah. So they haven't been able to meet their business objectives. They haven't been able to grow the way they wanted to, haven't been able to expand into the markets, or they haven't been able to attract the right sort of people because word's gotten around that the place is shit, got this shit system and it's horrible and people hate it and God, don't go work there, right? There's all sorts of bad spin-offs that just keep tornadoing away, right? But then they say, you know what, all right, whatever, time to get out of this. Now that could be one small component of the system that they've tried to implement, and they just decide to do something different in that space. But more often it's, over the shoulder, down, onto the heap and start again, right?
Start again, which is painful. So look, looking forward.
And they don't have the money to do it the same way that they wanted to do it the first time. So now they've got to do it cheaper. So now they're doubly stuck. Well, the system we really want to buy costs X, but we've just spent 2.5 times X on a system that didn't work. So first of all, everyone's gun shy. But secondly, they just, it's even harder to find the right human and dollar capital resources to be able to throw at the project.
Yeah, I'm glad you interrupted me there. That's a good distinction. So thank you for that. Mark, it wouldn't be a podcast talking to a technology person in 2026 if I didn't talk about AI.
I wondered when the world's shortest acronym was going to come up.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're in the up to your elbows in technology and technology transformation, business transformation, and all those types of things, and data. Is really, the old adage of garbage in, garbage out is still correct. regardless of how clever the actual machine is. So, what should people, business leaders, be thinking about more that they're not thinking about? And then I'm going to give you the chance to answer two questions at once. What should they actually start to tune out?
So I think the first thing is that now I kind of feel we're through the bubble of the first initial sort of soap bubble rising out of this. There's, if you think about there was a few months not so long ago, and I don't want to try and date this podcast too much, but there was a few months not so long ago where it was every conversation in daily life and in business was about AI, right? So it was, some bank has just decided that they're going to let 4,000 people go, and that's because they'll be able to process a ton of stuff. They're going to take that money and invest a chunk of it in building AI processing to help streamline and execute a lot of the daily stuff they do, right? And understandably, shock, horror, awful, oh my word, what's that going to do to the people whose jobs are going to go? What's that going to do to the economy in the terms of the money that those people don't have to spend while they try and go and find another job, and where are they going to find another job? And, all that incredibly important social conversation, right? That's kind of happening in the for want of a better description, the media, right? But then you've got what's happening inside boardrooms, which is, how are we going to use AI, right? Dinosaurs like me, and I say this absolutely truthfully, have really only started to embrace AI-based productivity tools. I'm using AI tool X within my Excel, within my Word, right? 6 months ago, I wasn't doing that, right? 6 months ago, I didn't think it was all that important. I didn't think it was all that great. 6 months ago feels like a decade ago now, right? So there's that kind of micro conversation that people like me and you are having with each other, having with themselves. But then there's the conversation around the boardroom table as well, which is, okay, what are we doing here? How should we be looking at this AI thing, right? And then the next question is, well, how? So someone somewhere will say, oh, well, I started playing with Tool X and it's really cool. I've been able to, hey, look at this app I coded up, right? And I know nothing about coding up apps, but look at this app I coded up. Well, isn't that fantastic? Great. All right. Now, how can we use that for our business? How can we use that idea, right? So they leap to the solution without thinking about what it is that they actually want to achieve, right? What's the problem that we want to address? What's the cost of that problem? Why is it worth fixing? Right? And how would we go about fixing it? Because all an AI tool in this kind of business context, if we talk about this idea of automating stuff, right? An AI tool can only automate a process that's really well understood and is really well defined to execute well inside the business. Because otherwise, to your point of garbage in, garbage out, if all I'm doing is figuring out a way to streamline a whole pile of steps that moves data from one spreadsheet to another and make sure that the air conditioning turns on at 8 o'clock in the morning, well, that's great. I've stopped somebody from having to do that. But what's the business problem I've solved? So when we go into those conversations, we start talking about, well, that's great. You can make the lights come on, because the X many people are now in the office because they've swiped in their cards and whatever. Now that doesn't sound like AI, but it kind of is, right? It's something deciding to do an action based on some parameters that you've given it, so that a person doesn't have to go and do it, right?
Yep.
Well, that's great, but turning on the lights isn't a problem that's going to accelerate the growth of your business. So when we get into those conversations, we start talking about, what are the problems that you've got that if you could solve, if you could streamline, if you could automate, if you could make smarter, if you could make smarter decisions because you had the information and that information was better and cleaner and whatever, what are those problems that would result in a 10 times improvement in performance of something? We call it 10xing, right?
Yep.
But that's not a new phrase. People have been 5xing and writing books about 10xing businesses for years, right? Well before AI came along. So it's really just about saying, all right, AI now is this concept that we have, which if really properly applied, because we've looked back at basic principles about what the problem is, that if we were to go and throw that stone into a pond would make a big splash and ripples that went on forever. What's the 10x problem that we could solve if we were to get the process right and then automate it using AI, right? Those are the conversations that we try and make the thoughts turn to, the mindset change to, rather than saying what are the little bits and pieces of cool stuff that we can do that looks really cool and gets people really excited, but isn't necessarily going to truly move the dial into our business acceleration.
Mark, I've really loved this conversation. Thank you so much for being part of the podcast. So I just want to ask you a last question. So behind all of it, the business, the decisions, the lessons, what's the one thing that you go back to, where you revisit when the going gets tough? Because no business is always, up and to the right. And you've been doing this for 30 years. You've seen a few business cycles, I'm sure. What's the one thing that you keep coming back to when business gets hard?
I think we've talked a lot about systems and processes and tools and AI and all that kind of stuff. And those are fundamentally critical things. But I think at the end of the day, when things get really tough inside your business, it's having people around you that you genuinely can trust, and that you can have real faith in, that they're going to be part of helping you get through it. And I think, we all went through COVID, and some people did extraordinarily well out of COVID. They're in the right place at the right time with the right products, all that kind of good stuff, and the right mindset. Other businesses, IT, for example, we're in deep shit because we were discretionary spend all of a sudden, right? So, I go back to that time, and our team were unbelievable in the way that they rallied around the business. Now, obviously, there's a bit of self-interest there, right? So it can help the business survive, then we've all still got jobs. But it was so much more than that. It was palpable that our team was there to help us. And so when things get really tough, it's the people around me and immediately around me in the leadership team that I turn to for support and help and advice. And I know that the extension of them into the rest of our organization, and we're not that big, so there's not that many people, but they're the ones that I know are going to help me get through today, this week, this month, to when times are a bit better again.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate your time. So if anybody has listened to this and they want to get in touch with Mark, I'll make sure that all of his links are down below in the show notes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate your time today. Talk to you later.
Pleasure, Matthew. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.